They say love makes people do crazy things. But what if that love is forbidden? What if it's hidden behind iron bars, whispered through the cracks of a prison cell, and fueled by secrecy? And what if protecting that love means someone has to die? Tonight, we unravel the shocking case of a prison deputy who crossed the ultimate line, an affair with an inmate. When another prisoner uncovered their secret, silence became a deadly necessity. What happened next was a brutal cover-up, a crime so shocking it would shake the prison system to its core. How far would someone go to protect a forbidden love? And what happens when passion turns into obsession, and obsession into murder? Stay with us till the end, because this story is filled with deception, betrayal, and a final twist so shocking, you won't see it coming. In 2019, Officer Rachel Martinez was a respected deputy at Black Ridge Correctional Facility, a high-security prison known for housing some of the most dangerous criminals in the state. Colleagues described her as tough, no-nonsense, and fiercely loyal to the job. She had a reputation for keeping her cool in tense situations, navigating the unpredictable nature of prison life with an almost mechanical precision. But beneath her disciplined exterior, Rachel harbored a dangerous secret, one that would be revealed in the most horrifying way. Rachel had spent years building a career in law enforcement. She knew the rules, the risks, and the hard line that separated officers from the inmates they guarded. Yet, despite everything she stood for, she found herself drawn to the one man she was supposed to keep behind bars: Darius King. Darius was not just another inmate. He was charming, calculated, and dangerously persuasive. He had a way of getting under people's skin, manipulating them without them even realizing it. His past was littered with violent crimes, armed robbery, aggravated assault, and rumors of connections to organized crime. But to Rachel, he was something else entirely. He was intoxicating, a man who saw her not as a prison guard, but as a woman. It started small with stolen glances across the prison yard, a lingering touch when she passed him his meal tray, casual conversations that turned into intimate confessions. Darius knew exactly what he was doing. He sensed Rachel's loneliness, her desire to feel seen, and he exploited it masterfully. Their conversations became longer, their meetings riskier. He slipped her notes, messages scribbled on scraps of paper, tucked inside food wrappers, hidden beneath the layers of routine prison life. Rachel told herself she was in control, that she could stop anytime. But she didn't. She let the lines blur, let herself fall deeper into his web. Late at night, she would replay their conversations, the way he made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. She began taking risks, like letting him stay out of his cell longer than allowed, slipping him contraband items, bending rules she once upheld without question. One evening, everything escalated. During a routine patrol of the cell blocks, Rachel found herself lingering outside Darius's cell. The hallway was empty, the security cameras in that section conveniently malfunctioning, a coincidence she would later realize was anything but. Darius was waiting, his voice a hushed whisper as he called her over. She knew she should walk away. Instead, she stepped closer. "Come inside," he murmured, his hand resting lightly against the cell bars. Rachel hesitated, every rational part of her screaming to turn back. But she didn't. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, her breath hitching as Darius moved toward her, his presence overwhelming. That night changed everything. It was no longer just an emotional connection, it became physical, dangerous, irreversible. Their affair spiraled out of control. Rachel began sneaking into restricted areas to be alone with Darius. She smuggled him a burner phone, allowing them to communicate in secret. The thrill of the forbidden consumed her, clouding her judgment. But with every risk, the walls around them tightened. Someone was bound to notice. And someone did. Terrence Holloway, an observant and street-smart inmate, had been watching. He had seen the way Rachel looked at Darius, had noticed the subtle but unmistakable signs of their illicit relationship. And Terrence knew an opportunity when he saw one. One afternoon, as Rachel finished her rounds, she found a note slipped into her locker. The message was chillingly simple. I know your secret. We need to talk. Her stomach twisted into knots. If Terrence exposed her, it would mean the end of everything, her job, her freedom, and possibly her life. When she met him later that night in the empty laundry room, his smirk sent a shiver down her spine. You've been sloppy, officer, he said, leaning casually against a washing machine. I see everything that goes on in here. And I know what you've been doing with Darius. Rachel tried to deny it, but Terrence wasn't buying it. He had leverage, and he was going to use it. You're going to do some things for me, he said. Or I tell the warden everything. He wanted favors like extra food, smuggled cigarettes, protection from rival inmates. At first, Rachel complied, hoping to keep him quiet. But Terrence was insatiable. His demands grew bigger, riskier. He wanted money, access to restricted areas, even the promise of help getting out early. Rachel was trapped. Darius, always calculating, had a solution. We handle this, he said over the burner phone one night. We make sure he never talks. Rachel's hands shook as she listened. She knew what he was suggesting, and she knew there was no turning back. One stormy night, Blackridge Correctional Facility was in turmoil. Thunder rumbled ominously outside, and rain lashed against the prison's metal roofs. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. A reported altercation in another cell block had sent officers scrambling, leaving gaps in security, a perfect storm for what was about to unfold. Rachel Martinez knew this was her moment. With chaos diverting the attention of guards and inmates alike, she lured Terrence Holloway into an empty supply room, deep within the labyrinthine halls of the prison. The air smelled of bleach and rusted metal, the dim overhead bulb flickering uncertainly. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she faced him. You sure about this? Terrence asked, eyeing her with suspicion. Rachel forced a smirk, masking the tremor in her voice. This is big. Something that'll set you up for life. He hesitated, but greed won over caution. He stepped inside, the heavy metal door groaning shut behind him. The room swallowed them in eerie silence. Just then, Rachel's hidden phone buzzed faintly in her pocket. Darius was on the line, whispering instructions. His voice slithered into her ear like a venomous promise. Do it now. Rachel's grip tightened around the handle of the smuggled knife, tucked beneath her uniform. Her pulse roared in her ears. She could still back out. She could walk away. But what happens when there's no turning back? When the only way out is through blood? Terrence's eyes flickered with suspicion. Yo, what's going on? Before he could react, Rachel struck. The blade plunged into his abdomen with a sickening wet sound. Terrence let out a strangled gasp, his hands flying to the wound, his eyes wide with shock. The flickering bulb above cast jagged shadows on the walls as he staggered backward, knocking over a shelf of cleaning supplies. But Rachel wasn't done. Darius's voice remained steady in her ear. Again. Her breathing was ragged as she yanked the blade free and drove it into his chest. Terrence choked on his own blood, his fingers clawing at her uniform, smearing crimson across the fabric. His legs buckled. He collapsed to his knees, gurgling, trying to speak but there were no words left. Another strike. And another. The prison walls swallowed his screams, muffled beneath the roar of distant shouts from the ongoing chaos. Thunder cracked outside, masking the final, brutal slice as Rachel slashed his throat. A crimson arc splattered against the cold, gray tiles. Terrence's body convulsed once then went still. Rachel's hands trembled as she dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor, slick with blood. Her breaths came in jagged gasps. She stared at the lifeless body before her, adrenaline surging through her veins. Darius's voice hummed through the phone. Good girl. She swallowed hard, her stomach churning. There was no time for hesitation. She wiped the handle clean and stuffed the knife into a cloth bag before tucking it into her waistband. Her heart hammered as she cracked the door open and peered down the hallway. Empty. She moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows. She had planned this. Every step, every turn. The body needed to be hidden at least until morning. She dragged Terrence's corpse across the supply room floor, smearing blood in its wake, and shoved him into a nearby maintenance closet. His limp limbs folded awkwardly, his head slumping against a mop bucket. The stench of bleach mixed with the sharp tang of blood, making her stomach turn. Locking the closet behind her, Rachel wiped her hands on her uniform, steadied her breathing, and slipped back into the prison's main corridor. Just another officer on duty, caught in the chaos of the night. But no one knew. Yet. What would drive a prison deputy to throw away her entire life for an inmate? Was it love? Fear? Or something even darker? The next morning, the discovery of Terrence Holloway's mutilated body sent shockwaves through the prison. The brutality of the crime sent a clear message: this wasn't just a random act of violence. This was calculated and intentional. Investigators descended on Blackridge, combing through security footage, questioning inmates and guards alike. But there was a problem. The cameras covering the supply room and maintenance closets had conveniently malfunctioned that night. No clear footage. No immediate suspects. At first, it seemed like an unsolvable crime. Blackridge Correctional Facility was a den of hardened criminals, filled with security blind spots and overlapping alibis. No witnesses, no murder weapon, just a lifeless body in a maintenance closet and a prison full of potential suspects. But something gnawed at the investigators. The security footage around the time of the murder was mysteriously corrupted right at the crucial moment when Terrence Holloway had vanished. A convenient coincidence, or something more deadly? And one more troubling detail stood out: Rachel Martinez was one of the only officers on duty in that sector that night. Detective Alan Graves, a seasoned investigator known for his relentless pursuit of the truth, found himself drawn deeper into the case. The crime scene was too clean, too calculated. This wasn't the work of an impulsive inmate, it was premeditated. And then came the biggest break in the case: DNA evidence. Under the harsh glow of the forensic lab's lights, a single strand of hair lay under magnification. It had been found on the sleeve of Terrence's jumpsuit, and after a grueling round of tests, the results came back, a perfect match to Officer Rachel Martinez. Detective Graves sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the glaring screen in front of him. He scrolled through the prison's call logs, searching for anomalies. Then he saw it: a series of unauthorized calls made from a contraband cell phone. The same number appeared again and again, always during Rachel's shifts. A cold realization settled in his gut. These weren't just random calls. He cross-referenced the number with the inmate records. His breath hitched. The number was registered to Darius King. Rachel hadn't just been careless, she had been in constant contact with an inmate. The evidence was damning, but Graves needed more. He needed to know exactly what those calls contained. Rachel's palms were slick with sweat as she sat at the steel table, her uniform suddenly feeling too tight. She tried to steady her breathing, but the weight of the room pressed down on her. Graves slid a thick manila folder across the table. "We pulled some phone records," he said, his voice unreadable. "Want to explain why you were making frequent calls to Darius King?" Rachel's expression barely flickered. "I don't know what you're talking about." Graves leaned forward, his fingers tapping the file. "Then maybe you can explain why your DNA was found on Terrence Holloway's clothing. A dead man, a man who was conveniently murdered during your shift." Rachel's pulse roared in her ears. She forced herself to remain still, to keep the mask of indifference on her face. "That prison is filthy," she shot back. "I work there every day. My DNA could be anywhere." Graves let the silence stretch. Then, he opened the folder and flipped over the top sheet. a printed transcript of phone conversations. He read aloud. "It's done." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. "No one saw. No one will know." Graves set the paper down with a quiet finality. "That was your voice, Officer Martinez." The events played out in Rachel's mind like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. The way she had lured Terrence in. The way Darius's voice had whispered through the contraband phone, urging her forward. The way the knife had felt in her hand, how the air had been thick with the scent of bleach and blood. She had done it for love, for Darius, and for a future that no longer seemed possible. But now, sitting in that sterile room under Graves' unyielding gaze, she knew the truth. There was no escape. The case against Rachel Martinez unraveled quickly. The DNA evidence, the phone records, the manipulated security footage, it all led back to her. And once investigators dug deeper, they uncovered even more: smuggled contraband, security breaches, secret meetings with Darius King. The love affair that had cost a man his life was now a scandal that rocked the entire prison system. The courtroom was packed. Spectators, reporters, and legal analysts filled every available seat, their eyes trained on Rachel Martinez as she sat at the defense table. Her hands were shackled, her once pristine uniform now replaced by a dull orange jumpsuit. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of justice pressing down on everyone present. Rachel's face was pale, but her expression was defiant. Her attorney, a seasoned defense lawyer named Daniel Pierce, had advised her to remain silent to let him do the talking. But Rachel had made up her mind because she had nothing left to lose. As the judge called the court to order, the prosecution wasted no time in painting Rachel as a cold-blooded killer. This woman, a law enforcement officer sworn to uphold justice, chose instead to take a life. She meticulously planned and executed the murder of Terrence Caldwell, a man who had no idea what was coming for him. Rachel clenched her fists under the table. That wasn't the truth, not the whole truth, she had to speak. When her lawyer finally called her to the stand, Rachel took a deep breath, stood, and approached. The moment she sat down and raised her right hand to take the oath, the entire courtroom fell silent. Even the judge seemed to lean forward slightly, sensing the magnitude of what was about to be revealed. "I did it," Rachel admitted, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. "I killed Terrence Caldwell." Murmurs spread like wildfire. The judge banged the gavel to restore order. Rachel's lawyer rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated, but she ignored him. "But I had no choice," she continued. "I wasn't acting alone. I was manipulated, deceived, threatened." The prosecutor stood, arms crossed. "By whom, Officer Martinez?" Rachel turned her gaze to the defense table where Darius King sat, his face an unreadable mask of indifference. "By him." All eyes shifted to Darius. He smirked and shook his head, an expression of mock amusement. "That's a lie," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "She's just another dumb officer who got played." Rachel felt like the wind had been knocked out of her. Those words, so cruel, so dismissive, hit her harder than she'd expected. She had given up everything for him. Risked her career, her freedom, her soul. And now, he was discarding her like she was nothing. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You told me he had to die, Darius. You said he was going to ruin us both." Darius leaned back in his chair, expression cool. "Did I? Prove it." Rachel's mind raced. The texts. The phone calls. The whispered conversations in the dark. But she had erased most of them, thinking she was protecting him. Now, she realized, she had only been protecting a ghost. Darius had made sure there was nothing left to tie him to the crime. The prosecutor seized the moment. "So, let me get this straight. You willingly carried out this murder with no concrete proof that Mr. King ordered it? You simply took his word?" Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. She had walked straight into their trap. The jury didn't deliberate long. When they returned, the foreman cleared his throat and read the verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. Rachel's world tilted. The walls of the courtroom seemed to close in on her, the whispers of the spectators blending into a deafening hum. Her legs trembled beneath the table as the judge pronounced the sentence. Life in prison with no possibility of parole. A sob caught in Rachel's throat, but she refused to break down. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Darius, still shackled for his own crimes unrelated to the murder, simply smirked as he watched her fate unfold. The judge dismissed the court, and officers approached to take Rachel away. As she was led past Darius, she turned to him one last time. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you do this to me?" He met her eyes, and for the briefest moment, she thought she saw something: regret, remorse. But then the mask was back, and he chuckled lowly. "Because I could." Rachel's heart shattered. She was taken away, her wrists bound, her future stolen. The prison transport van waited outside, its steel doors yawning open, ready to consume her. She stepped inside, the weight of her actions, her choices, pressing down on her like 1,000 bricks. As the doors slammed shut behind her, she realized the bitter irony of it all. She had spent her life putting criminals behind bars. Now, she was one of them. Justice had been served. But at what cost? A forbidden love affair, a deadly cover-up, and a betrayal that ruined everything. What do you think? Was Rachel a victim of manipulation, or was she just as guilty as Darius? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love gripping true crime stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Crime Chronicles, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay safe, and always remember, secrets have a way of coming out.